The positive pregnancy test wasn't hers. That was the first and only certainty that pierced through Emily Carter's mind as the air escaped her lungs. The small white plastic device, with its two unmistakable blue lines, was tossed inside the glove compartment of Ryan's Ford Explorer, her husband. She'd only opened the door to grab a shopping bag she'd forgotten on the passenger seat. A mundane motion, an ordinary day that shattered in an instant. If anyone ever doubted her strength, sign up. Because sometimes the courage of a woman alone is what the world needs to see most. Emily remained frozen, her hand still on the door handle, in the quiet garage of the upscale apartment building where they lived, in the Highland neighborhood of Denver. The scent of new leather from the vehicle, which once brought her a sense of comfort and status, now felt suffocating. She took her birth control pill religiously, every day, at the same time, for years. There was no room for error. No possibility it was hers. Her hand began to shake, not a subtle tremor but a convulsion that climbed up her arm and threatened to consume her entire body. She closed the car door with a soft click, almost automatic. The sound echoed in the empty garage. She leaned against the cold metal of the vehicle, feeling her legs weaken, unable to support her weight. The ground didn't collapse. The world didn't crumble. The sensation was more physical, more brutal. It was as if gravity had suddenly doubled, pulling her down, crushing her bones. She breathed deeply, once, twice, 3 times. The air entered, but it didn't seem to reach where it needed to. The metallic taste of panic flooded her mouth. Emily was a dermatological physical therapist. She understood the human body, its reactions, its limits. She knew she was going into shock. She needed to move. She needed to get out of there. With an effort that seemed monumental, she straightened up. She grabbed the shopping bag that had been the cause of it all. Inside, the ingredients for the special dinner she planned to make for Ryan. A cruel irony. She walked toward the elevator, her steps strangely heavy on the polished concrete. Each step was a conscious decision. Left leg, right leg. Don't think, just move. Inside the apartment, the silence was oppressive. The spacious area, decorated with the elegant minimalism they both appreciated, now seemed like an empty stage. She placed the bag on the marble kitchen counter. Her hands still trembled, and she let a glass jar fall. The sound of the glass shattering on the floor was sharp, violent. Emily didn't move to clean it up. She just stared at the shards, scattered like the image of her life in that moment. She sat on the living room sofa, her phone in hand. The urge to call Ryan, to scream, to demand an explanation, was overwhelming. But another part of her, a colder and more calculating side she barely knew, held her back. What would he say? He'd lie, obviously. Say it was from a co-worker, that he'd given someone a ride, that he'd found it in the parking lot. He was a sales manager at a luxury car dealership. He was a salesman. His life was building plausible narratives to convince people. He was good at it. Too good. Emily thought about her own life. At 33, she had a solid career, a reputable aesthetics clinic where she was a partner, a reputation to uphold. She was seen as a successful woman, balanced, who had everything under control. Married for 7 years to Ryan, they formed the couple everyone admired. Attractive, accomplished, regulars at the best restaurants in the city. Her family, traditional and lively, adored Ryan. He was the perfect son-in-law, always smiling at the Sunday barbecues, always with a funny story to tell. The image of him, smiling at her father at the last family gathering, flashed in her mind. The ease with which he charmed everyone, the confidence he exuded. Was it all a facade? How many other things were hidden behind that smile? The tremor in her hands subsided, replaced by a coldness that spread through her veins. She wouldn't call. She wouldn't scream. She wouldn't give him the chance to manipulate the situation, to turn her into the jealous, out-of-control wife. She stood up, went to the bathroom, and splashed her face with cold water. She looked at her reflection in the mirror. Her eyes were sunken, her skin pale, but there was something else there, a hardness she didn't recognize. When Ryan arrived 2 hours later, she was in the kitchen, finishing preparing dinner. The glass shards had been cleaned up. The counter was spotless. "Hey, babe," he said, coming in and setting his leather briefcase on a chair. He came up behind her and hugged her, kissing her neck. "Smells amazing." Emily didn't move. Her body stiffened under his touch. She smelled his cologne, a mix of the woody one he always wore with something else, a floral trace, sweet that wasn't hers. "Tired?" she asked, her voice coming out surprisingly calm. "Exhausted. The day was crazy. We closed the sale on that Porsche Panamera, remember I told you? The client was a tough nut to crack." He spoke with his usual excitement, his eyes shining. Emily just nodded, turning to face him. She observed him as if for the first time, his perfectly styled hair, his well-trimmed beard, his designer shirt wrinkled just enough to look casually elegant. He was a handsome man, charming, a predator. "That's great, honey. I'm happy for you," she said, and even managed to force a small smile. During dinner, she listened to him talk about targets, commissions, and the business trip he'd take the following week. She ate in silence, each bite an effort. The food had no taste. The wine, an expensive Cabernet he loved, went down bitter. She felt his gaze on her from time to time, a bit inquisitive. "Everything okay, Emily?" "You're quiet today. Just a little tired." "Busy day at the clinic too," she lied, and the lie came out with an ease that scared her. He seemed to accept the answer. He kept talking, and Emily just nodded, her mind miles away. She thought about the pregnancy test, the 2 blue lines, the unknown woman carrying her husband's child. Nausea rose in her throat, and she had to grip the utensils tightly not to get up and vomit right there at the dinner table. That night, in bed, he reached for her. His hands roamed her body with a familiarity that now felt like a violation. Emily turned away, claiming a headache. "Again, Emily? That's the 3rd time this week." There was irritation in his voice, impatience. She felt a wave of anger so intense that for a second she thought she'd explode, but the coldness overtook her again. "Sorry. The migraine is killing me. I'll take some medicine." She got up and went to the bathroom, locking the door. She braced both hands on the sink, her body trembling again. She looked at the medicine cabinet. There was her pill pack, with the days of the week marked, all the pills taken correctly. Silent proof of her fidelity, her care, proof of his betrayal. She didn't go back to bed right away. She sat on the cold bathroom floor for nearly an hour, her thoughts spinning in circles. Discovering the pregnancy test wasn't the end. It was just the beginning. She didn't know what she'd do, but she knew what she wouldn't. She wouldn't be the victim. She wouldn't cry. She wouldn't beg. She'd go back to that bed, lie next to the man who'd destroyed her trust, and pretend nothing happened. And wait, because the truth, she now understood, wasn't something you asked for. It was something you hunted. The next morning arrived with an almost insulting normalcy. The Denver sun, often bright and unrelenting, poured a clear, crisp light through the apartment, illuminating the dust particles dancing in the air. Emily woke before Ryan, an old habit that now served as a small trench. His side of the bed was untouched, since she'd gotten up the night before to take refuge in the bathroom. She hadn't returned. She'd spent the night awake, sitting in the armchair in the closet, silence her only companion. Exhaustion weighed on her muscles, but her mind was sharp, alert, like a cornered animal. She moved through the house with the precision of an automaton. She brewed the coffee, the strong aroma filling the kitchen. She dressed for work, slacks and a silk blouse, armor for the day ahead. Each action was deliberate, a way to maintain control over the chaos that had settled inside her. When Ryan finally appeared in the kitchen, already dressed for work, his smile was the usual one, easy and carefree. He grabbed a mug of coffee, his eyes skimming the digital newspaper on his tablet. "Morning, love. Sleep well?" he asked, not really expecting an answer, his attention already on the stock quotes. "Yes." The lie came out dry, a shard of glass in her throat. He didn't notice, or chose not to. His indifference was a knife twisting slowly. He finished his coffee, gave her a quick peck on the cheek, a cold, perfunctory touch, and grabbed his briefcase. "See you tonight. I have happy hour with the team. Might be a bit late." Emily just nodded, watching him leave. The door closed, and the click of the lock was like the start of a timer. She was alone. The silence that followed brought no peace, just the amplification of her thoughts. The pregnancy test, the unknown woman, the child that wasn't hers. The words swirled in her head, a poisonous litany. She needed air, needed to get out, to dive into work and try for a few hours to be just Dr. Emily Carter, the competent professional who solved other people's problems. The day at the clinic was a blur of procedures, consultations, and forced smiles. She operated on autopilot, her hands executing with precision the treatments her mind barely registered. Her patients, accustomed to her attention and warm demeanor, didn't seem to notice the distance in her gaze. To them, Emily was still the safe harbor she always had been. No one could see the storm brewing behind that facade of calm and professionalism. She returned home in the late afternoon, exhausted in a way that went far beyond physical fatigue. It was a soul-deep weariness. The apartment was silent, just as she'd left it. Ryan hadn't arrived yet. She kicked off her shoes, feeling the immediate relief, and walked barefoot across the hardwood floor. She was heading to the bedroom to change when she heard his voice. He was in the home office, the door slightly ajar. The voice was low, almost a murmur, but the acoustics of the long empty hallway carried the sound to her. Emily stopped, her body instantly tense. He was on the phone. "No, she doesn't suspect a thing. I know what I'm doing." A pause. Emily held her breath, her heart pounding erratically against her ribs. She approached step by step, pressing her body against the cold hallway wall, out of sight of the door. "Stay calm, Mom. I'll handle this. She won't find out anything." The phrase hit her with the force of a punch to the gut. The air left her lungs in a silent hiss. "Stay calm, Mom." He wasn't talking to a friend, a colleague. He was talking to his own mother. The woman who called her daughter, who hugged her at Sunday barbecues, who praised her pot roast. The complicity in his voice, the calm with which he promised the deception, was more devastating than any shout. She froze. Her blood seemed to ice in her veins, and a cutting clarity took the place of the panic. There in that dark hallway she understood. There was no more room for doubts, for the small, desperate voice in her head trying to find an innocent explanation. The pregnancy test wasn't a lost item. The conversation wasn't a misunderstanding. It was a conspiracy, a betrayal architected and covered up by the person who should have been her greatest support after him. He was hiding something big, and his mother knew. Emily retreated, silent as a shadow. She went back to the living room, her body moving on pure instinct of self-preservation. She sat on the sofa, her hands resting in her lap, her knuckles white. The adrenaline that had sustained her the day before had vanished, leaving behind a cold, heavy void. It wasn't pain or shock anymore. It was resolution, an icy certainty that the marriage she believed in was a farce. She no longer needed to search for excuses for him. The phrase she'd overheard sealed the betrayal with a lead stamp. Now the only question that mattered was, what would she do with that truth? The image of the submissive, weeping woman, the wife who makes a scene, was swept from her mind. That wasn't her. It never would be. When Ryan emerged from the office minutes later, he found her sitting in the living room staring into space. "Hey babe, I got here a while ago, was handling some work stuff," he said, the lie sliding from his lips with a frightening naturalness. Emily turned her face slowly and stared at him. She studied him, the husband, the stranger, the liar. She said nothing. She just held his gaze, letting the silence stretch between them, dense and charged. For the first time, she saw a flicker of discomfort in his eyes, a small crack in his facade of confidence. "Something happen?" he asked, his voice a little less sure. Emily blinked slowly. "No, nothing," she replied, her voice low and controlled. "Just thinking." She stood up and went to the kitchen to prepare something to eat, leaving him standing in the middle of the living room. He followed her with his eyes, confused. That night, the dynamic between them had changed forever. He didn't know it yet, but he was no longer the driver of that story. She had taken the wheel, and she was about to chart a new course, one that would lead him straight to the collision he was trying so hard to avoid. Emily's war wouldn't be fought with shouts and tears, but in the silence of sleepless nights and the bluish glow of computer screens. The phrase she'd overheard in the hallway, "She won't find out anything," wasn't just confirmation of the betrayal, It was an insult to her intelligence. They underestimated her. Ryan, his mother, the unknown woman, all operating under the presumption that Emily was a passive piece on the board of their lives, a decorative figure that could be easily deceived. That miscalculation would be their ruin. The investigation began that same night. After Ryan fell asleep, exhaling the false tranquility of someone who believes they have control, Emily got out of bed. The movement was fluid, silent. She was no longer the wife who shared that space with him. She was an intruder in her own home, a hunter. In the office, the same place where the betrayal had been sealed in a complicit whisper on the phone, she turned on his laptop. The password was their wedding anniversary date. The irony was so thick she tasted bitterness in her mouth. She didn't search for messages or emails. It would be too obvious. Ryan was meticulous, a salesman trained to cover his tracks. Instead, Emily opened the door to the world he really inhabited. The world of numbers, expenses, transactions. She started with the corporate credit card statements, a territory she'd never explored, out of trust and disinterest. Now she dissected it with the precision of a surgeon. Line by line, she analyzed the charges. Dinners at restaurants they'd never visited together, always for two. Florists in cities where he was supposedly on business meetings. Small gifts, discreet jewelry, purchases at department stores that didn't fit his profile. They were breadcrumbs, but together they began to form a path. A path that always led to a name repeating in flight and hotel receipts: Jessica Hayes. The name appeared as a companion on a hotel reservation in Chicago, dated 3 months ago. The trip, he'd said, was for a sales conference. He'd called every night, his voice full of a longing that now sounded obscene. Jessica Hayes. The name was common, but in the context of those expenses, it sounded like a verdict. With the name in hand, the second phase of the investigation began. Social media. Emily typed the name into the search bar, her heart hammering against her ribcage. Dozens of profiles appeared. She was patient. She cross-referenced information, cities, mutual connections, and then she found her. The profile picture was of a smiling woman, with brown hair and lively eyes, about 30 years old. Next to her, a broad-shouldered man with a restrained smile. On the woman's ring finger, a wedding band gleamed. Emily felt a wave of cold sweep through her body. The woman was married. The mouse click was the only sound in the silent office. She opened the profile, which was public, a window into a life carefully curated for the world to see. There were photos of trips, dinners with friends, declarations of love to her husband, and there were photos with Ryan, discreet, in groups, at company events. Jessica Hayes was a sales representative, the co-worker, the travel partner, the missing piece in the puzzle. She scrolled the page, absorbing every detail. She saw photos of Jessica with her son, a boy about 5 years old. She saw the ring on her hand in dozens of photos. The woman wasn't just having an affair with her husband, she was betraying her own family. The pregnancy, the test in the glove compartment, the child on the way would be the fruit of a double betrayal, a secret that would destroy two families. And then Emily focused on the man beside her in the photos, the husband. His profile was tagged in several posts, Michael Hayes. Unlike Jessica's open and sunny profile, Michael's was more restrained, almost Spartan. Few photos, mostly with his wife and son, or in running gear from road races. In his bio, just 3 words: dad, husband, police officer. The information hit her with unexpected force. Police officer, not an executive, a lawyer, or a businessman. A man trained to handle conflicts, to enforce order, to react under pressure. A man whose profession was defined by codes of honor and discipline. A man who very likely wouldn't react to betrayal with indifference. Emily leaned back in the chair, her brain processing the new variable. The husband of the mistress existed. He had a face, a name, a profession, a normal life about to be imploded. She looked at Michael Hayes' photo, at his serious face, at the way he held his son on his shoulders. There was a solidity to him, a presence that contrasted with Ryan's polished, slippery image. In that moment, the plan began to form in her mind. It wasn't a thoughtless plan of revenge born of rage. It was something colder, more strategic. Confronting Ryan would be useless. He'd deny, manipulate, turn her into the villain. Crying and despairing would give him the power. But the truth was a weapon. And a weapon is only effective when used at the right moment, against the right target. She didn't want to destroy Ryan. She wanted something deeper. She wanted him exposed by the very web of lies he'd built. She wanted his mask to fall not by her hands, but by the consequences of his own actions. And Michael Hayes, the betrayed husband, the police officer, was the key. He was the external force that could detonate that house of cards. Emily closed the laptop. The decision made. The tremor in her hands had stopped completely. The coldness she'd felt in the last few days now had a purpose, a direction. She was no longer the victim in this story. She was the architect of its end. The days following the discovery were a monumental exercise in self-control. Emily moved through the marriage routine like an actress in her most challenging role. She smiled at the right moments, asked the expected questions about Ryan's day, and maintained the facade of normalcy with a perfection that frightened her. Inside, however, she was a well of ice and calculation. Every smile of his, every casual touch, every lie disguised as everyday conversation was catalogued in her mind, no longer as a wound, but as fuel for the resolution solidifying within her. She said nothing to her husband. The impulse to confront him, to throw the truth in his face and watch his good guy mask shatter, was a constant temptation, a scream trapped in her throat. But she stifled it. Confronting him would be momentary relief, an explosion of pain that would allow him to defend himself, manipulate the narrative, perhaps even flip the blame. It would be his path, not hers. She asked for no explanation, knowing she'd only hear more lies, more elaborate constructions to protect him. The truth she possessed was pure, incontestable, and wouldn't be tainted by the poison of his denial. Emily's plan matured in the silence of her sleepless nights, while Ryan slept soundly beside her. The strategy wasn't about destruction, but revelation. The truth didn't need her voice to be heard. It just needed a stage and the right audience. And the audience, she decided, wouldn't be her. The definitive move was executed with the coldness of a military operation. One afternoon, while Ryan was in one of his extended meetings, Emily went to the garage. The Ford Explorer was there, a silent monument to the betrayal. With steady hands, wearing latex gloves she'd brought from the clinic, she opened the glove compartment. The pregnancy test was still there, tossed in a corner, a small piece of plastic loaded with the weight of a double life. She took it, placed it on a neutral background on the car seat, and photographed it with her phone. The image was clear, clinical, undeniable. The two blue lines stood out like a confession. Back in the apartment, she sat at her own laptop, a safe haven amid enemy territory. She opened the folders where she'd meticulously saved every piece of evidence. The screenshots of hotel reservations in Ryan's name, with Jessica Hayes as the companion. The credit card statements showing dinners for two in distant cities. The chronology of the betrayal was there, mapped in dates, locations, and amounts. She selected the most irrefutable documents, the proofs that left no room for interpretation. With the digital dossier assembled, the final step remained, finding Michael Hayes' contact. It wasn't hard. Through a deeper search, linking his name to his profession, she found a phone number associated with a small security business he ran on the side. It was a risk, but a calculated one. She created an anonymous email, a disposable account with no link to her identity. To that man, she wouldn't be Emily Carter, the betrayed wife. She'd be just a source of information. The message was short, direct, and devoid of emotion. She attached the photo of the pregnancy test and the reservation screenshots. In the body of the email, just one phrase carefully crafted to hit the core of the issue, a man's dignity being stolen without his knowledge. You deserve to know the truth about your own life before anyone else. She hit send. The mouse click echoed in the silent apartment. For a long moment she stared at the screen, her heart pounding. The arrow had been loosed. Now all that remained was to wait for the impact. The response didn't take long. Less than an hour later, a notification for a reply appeared on the screen. Emily's hand trembled slightly as she opened the email. Michael's message was even shorter than hers. I need to talk to you. In person. Emily felt a chill. His reaction wasn't denial or blind rage. It was pragmatic. He wanted to confirm the source, understand the extent of the damage. It was the reaction of a cop, someone trained to assess a crime scene before acting. She replied, agreeing, and they exchanged messages to arrange a meeting in a public neutral spot, a discreet coffee shop downtown, far from the neighborhoods they frequented. 2 days later, they met. Michael Hayes was exactly as he appeared in the photos, a solid man with an intense gaze that seemed to see through superficialities. He didn't waste time with pleasantries. He sat down, ordered a black coffee, and got straight to the point. "The proofs you sent me, are they real?" "Every one of them," Emily replied, her voice firm. "The pregnancy test was in my husband's car. The reservations are on his card statements." Michael listened in silence, his jaw clenched. He didn't show the pain he surely felt. There was just a contained fury, a dangerous energy emanating from him. He looked at the printed copies Emily had brought, running his finger over Jessica's name, his wife. "They think we're idiots," he said, his voice low and rough. "They live their lives, make plans, and us? We're the scenery, the home decor." In that moment, Emily didn't see a stranger, but an ally, a fellow sufferer forged in the same furnace of betrayal. "I don't want a scandal for myself," Emily said clearly. "I just want to get out of this with my dignity. But he can't just get away scot-free, not after this." Michael raised his eyes and stared at her. And for the first time, Emily saw the pain behind the fury, but she saw something more, an implacable determination. "Scot-free?" he repeated with a humorless laugh. "No, this won't end with an apology. I want everyone to know. His family, your family. I want him to have nowhere to hide. I want to take down the cheating couple live." The intensity in his voice was frightening and at the same time cathartic. He didn't want just justice. He wanted exposure. He wanted the humiliation he felt transferred to those who caused it, on a public stage, where the shame couldn't be denied or hidden. Emily thought about the next Sunday barbecue at her parents' house, the weekly sacred event. Her entire family would be there, her traditional parents, uncles, aunts, cousins. And Ryan would be there in the center of it all, playing his role of perfect son-in-law. It would be the ideal stage, the perfect audience. She took a deep breath, the decision solidifying like steel. "I'm in." Sunday dawned in Denver with a sky of pale blue, almost white, and a crisp air that cut the skin, typical of the city even in spring. For most people, it was a day of rest, family, tranquility. For Emily, it was Judgment Day. Every passing second was a step toward detonation. She moved through the morning with an outward calm that was the purest antithesis of the storm raging in her chest. The feeling wasn't nervousness or fear, but a heavy inevitability, as if she were about to witness a natural disaster she'd set in motion herself. Her parents' house in the Cherry Creek suburb was the epicenter of the Carter family life. A big house with a well-manicured yard and a patio out back where the grill reigned supreme. It was the stage for all celebrations, the safe harbor of tradition. On Sundays, the place filled with loud voices, laughter, and the unmistakable smell of meat on the grill. Today, for Emily, that smell seemed like one of sacrifice. They arrived around noon. Ryan drove the Ford Explorer, the ambient music filling the silence that had settled between them in recent days. He seemed not to notice, or chose to ignore, Emily's growing distance. As he parked on the street in front of the house, he turned to her, his usual smile on his face, a smile that now seemed grotesque, a poorly glued mask. "Ready to handle Uncle Jim asking when we're giving him a grandkid?" Ryan joked, trying to create a complicity that no longer existed. Emily just looked at him, expressionless. "Let's go in," was all she said. As they passed through the gate, they were immediately swallowed by the warm, noisy embrace of the family. Emily's mother, Karen, kissed her on the cheek, her eyes scanning her with the perpetual worry of all mothers. Her father, Robert, a man of few words and big gestures, gave Ryan a strong slap on the back, laughing at some joke he'd told. Uncles, aunts, cousins. Everyone was there, and all of them, without exception, adored Ryan. He was the dream son-in-law, the successful, charming man who'd won over the eldest and most reserved daughter of the family. Ryan flourished in that environment. He circulated around the grill area with the ease of a politician on the campaign trail, a beer in hand, the smile easy, the joke on the tip of his tongue. He was the center of attention, the unofficial master of ceremonies of that Sunday ritual. Emily watched him from afar, seated in a chair in the corner of the yard. She saw how he charmed her mother, how he listened with false attention to her father's fishing stories, how he played with the younger cousins. He was performing the role of good husband with a nauseating perfection. Every smile, every public gesture of affection was a silent stab. Emily exchanged short, discreet texts with Michael. "We're here." His response was immediate. "On my way. 1:30. She glanced at her watch. 20 minutes left. 20 minutes until the end of the world as she knew it. A small, terrified part of her wanted to yell for him not to come, to abort the mission. But the larger part, the one forged in the ice of betrayal and lies, remained firm. There was no turning back. Lunch was served. The long wooden table was covered with bowls of potato salad, coleslaw, cornbread, and of course the meats her father sliced with pride. Everyone sat down, the conversation flowing animatedly. Ryan sat next to Emily, placing his hand on her thigh under the table, a possessive gesture that made her stiffen. He leaned in and whispered in her ear, "You look so beautiful today and so quiet." She didn't respond. She just picked up her fork and knife, the food on her plate seeming like ashes. She felt her family's gazes on her. The aunt who asked if everything was okay, the cousin who commented that she looked pale. She replied with monosyllables, forcing a smile that didn't reach her eyes. Time dragged. Each chew, each sip of soda seemed to last an eternity. The clock on her wrist read 1:28. Then the sound. The doorbell rang. The sharp sound cut through the cacophony of conversations and laughter, imposing a brief silence. Everyone looked at each other. No one was expecting more people. "Huh, who could that be?" said Emily's mother, getting up to answer. Emily felt the blood drain from her face. Her heart began to pound uncontrollably, a muffled drum in her ears. Ryan looked at her, a wrinkle of questioning on his forehead. "Did you invite someone, babe?" She just shook her head no, her eyes fixed on the front door of the house, visible from the yard. Her mother opened the door, and there he was, Michael Hayes. He wasn't in uniform, but his posture was that of a man on duty. He wore jeans and a dark polo shirt, but the rigidity in his shoulders and the expression on his face left no doubt about his purpose. He exchanged a few words with Emily's mother, who looked confused and then stepped past her, walking with firm, deliberate steps toward the grill area. The silence, which had been brief, now became absolute. Conversations died. Forks stopped midway to mouths. All eyes turned to the stranger invading the sanctity of the Sunday barbecue. Michael didn't look at anyone. His eyes were locked on a single point. Ryan. Ryan, who had a piece of steak on his fork, froze. The color drained from his face. He recognized Michael. The good guy smile faded, replaced by a mask of panic and disbelief. He looked from Michael to Emily, comprehension dawning in his eyes like a slow-motion lightning bolt. Michael stopped beside the table, a few feet from Ryan. His presence was an anomaly, a dark, disruptive force in that scene of family joy. With a slow, calculated movement, he pulled some folded papers and a small plastic object from his back pocket. He placed them on the table, next to the bowl of potato salad, with a dull thud that echoed in the deadly silence. The pregnancy test, the hotel reservation printouts. Everyone's eyes at the table widened, fixed on the objects. Emily's father stood up, his face set in a confused and angry scowl. "What the hell is this? Who are you?" Michael ignored the question. He didn't take his eyes off Ryan, who was now white as a ghost, his mouth agape, voiceless. And then Michael spoke. His voice wasn't a shout, but it was loud, clear, and loaded with the weight of a verdict. Each word was a hammer shattering the glass of that family farce. "Your husband got my wife pregnant." Absolute silence, a silence so profound that Emily could hear the buzzing in her own ears. Her family's frozen gazes moved from Michael to Ryan and then to her. It was a ballet of shock and horror. Her mother's jaw dropped, her hand covering her mouth. Her father seemed to have aged 10 years in 10 seconds. Her uncles and cousins were paralyzed, their expressions ranging from disbelief to scandal. The protagonist's husband turns white, voiceless. Ryan tried to speak, but no sound came out. He looked like a fish out of water, gasping for the air that had been stolen from him. His facade, built so carefully over years, had been demolished in a single sentence. He was naked, exposed, humiliated in front of the clan he'd worked so hard to win over. The family goes into total shock. The shame was palpable, a toxic fog spreading across the table. That was the moment, the climax of Emily's opera, and she, the protagonist, finally moved. In the epicenter of the seismic silence, where each second stretched to the breaking point, Emily became the only point of movement. The chaos was a vortex around her, the shocked gazes of her family, Ryan's mortal pallor, Michael's granite presence. But inside her, a deep, crystalline calm had settled. It was the calm that comes after the storm passes, when everything that could be broken is already in pieces on the ground. She stood up. The movement wasn't abrupt or hesitant. It was fluid, deliberate, as if she were stretching after a long sleep. With an almost casual gesture, she ran her hand through her hair, adjusting a strand that wasn't out of place. It was an act of normalcy amid the absurdity, a sign that, for her, this wasn't the end, but a restart. She breathed deeply, the air filling her lungs, and the soft sound was the only thing that broke the tense silence. All eyes turned to her, waiting for the explosion, the tears, the confrontation, waiting for the script they knew. But Emily didn't give them the drama they craved. Her gaze passed over Ryan, not with hatred, but with a cutting indifference, as if looking at a stranger. Then she turned to Michael, an almost imperceptible nod of acknowledgement, of mission accomplished. And only then did she speak, her voice clear, without tremor, projected so everyone at the table could hear. "Thanks. I'm not wasting another day of my life on someone who doesn't know what loyalty is." The phrase hung in the air, simple, definitive, and lethal. It wasn't an accusation. It was a statement of facts. A dismissal. Without shouting, without crying, without explaining, Emily turned. She grabbed her purse from a nearby chair, pulled out the car keys from inside it, and walked away from the table. Her steps on the stone patio were firm, rhythmic. Each step was an affirmation of her newly reclaimed freedom. She moved out of sight, crossed the front door of the house, and vanished, beautiful in her resolve, cold in her dignity. Her exit was like pulling the pin from a grenade. The silence that followed was instantly shattered. The party, or what remained of it, continued, but now with him as the focus of the shame. Ryan, finally unlocked from his stupor, tried to stand, stammering Emily's name. "Emily, wait. I can explain." But her father, Robert, whose disappointment had turned into an icy fury, slammed his hand on the table with a force that made the bowls tremble. "Explain what?" His voice was a low thunder. "Explain how you turned my house into a circus? How you dishonored my daughter right in front of me?" Ryan's phone, forgotten on the table, began to ring, vibrating frantically. The name Jessica glowed on the screen, a second bomb exploding in sequence. He looked at the device with horror, as if it were a snake. The insistent ring was a cry of desperation from across the city. It was the mistress, no doubt informed by Michael that their world had just crumbled, realizing her own husband had left her to her own devices. Ryan was cornered. On one side, his father-in-law's contemptuous gaze. On the other, the desperate ring from the woman who'd led him to that abyss. He didn't answer. The phone finally went silent, leaving an echo of panic in the air. Michael Hayes, his work done, gathered his papers from the table. He looked at Ryan not with anger, but with a kind of somber pity. "Now stay with her," Michael said, his voice cutting, "and get ready for her to do to you exactly what she did to me." With that, he turned and left too, leaving behind the trail of his calculated destruction. Ryan collapsed into the chair, placing his hands on his head, fingers interlaced tightly, as if trying to prevent his skull from splitting. He was alone, a castaway on an island of accusing stares. His mother-in-law, Karen, who had adored him before, now looked at him with a mix of shame and anger. "You ruined everything, Ryan," she hissed, her voice low so the others wouldn't hear, but loaded with venom. "You had it all. A wonderful woman, a family that loved you. Why, for an affair, you threw your life in the trash." Her words hit him. He looked at the empty spot where Emily had been sitting. In that instant, the penny dropped with the weight of an anvil. He realized the monumental stupidity of his actions. He didn't love Jessica. She was an escape, a cheap thrill, a selfish impulse he never thought would have real consequences. He loved the life he had with Emily, the comfort, the status, the admiration. And now in his quest for something more, he'd lost everything. He was completely lost, a deposed king in a kingdom of barbecue and shame. Meanwhile, miles away, Emily drove aimlessly through the streets of Denver. The car windows were open, and the cool wind whipped her face, but she didn't feel it. There were no tears. There was just an immense void, a hollow space where a marriage had once been. But it wasn't a void of loss. It was a void of possibility. It was cleared ground, ready for new construction. She didn't know where she was going, but for the first time in a long time, she knew she was in control of her own destiny. The road ahead was open, and she was free. So what did you think? On a scale of 0 to 10, what score would you give it? Leave your comments saying which city you're watching from, and subscribe to follow our next stories. Thanks so much for the company, and see you next time.
Daisy Reed once believed that her love with Damian Lancaster was unbreakable. They met in their final year of university. She was an ambitious young woman with dreams of becoming a renowned fashion designer, while he was the poised and charismatic heir to the Lancaster financial empire. From late-night study sessions in the library to moonlit walks along the coast, there was always something deeper between them, something unspoken yet undeniable. Damian wasn't just her lover, he was her confidant, the one who believed in her even when she doubted herself. But everything fell apart just before graduation. One May morning, Daisy woke up to find that Damian was gone. Without a goodbye, without a single message. He vanished from her life as if he had never been there, leaving behind an emptiness she could never quite fill. She tried to move on, but nothing could erase the memories of him. There were nights when she wondered if what they had was nothing more than a beautiful illusion, and as time passed, she forced herself to accept that Damian Lancaster was nothing more than a part of her past. But the past has a way of returning, and she was completely unprepared for what was coming next. 5 years later, Daisy Reed had built a name for herself in the fashion world. She wasn't a household name, but she was a rising talent, known for her designs that were both elegant and powerful, a reflection of the woman she had become after years of heartbreak. She was working in her studio when an unexpected offer arrived. Lancaster Corporation wanted to collaborate with her on a high-profile project. Her first instinct was to refuse. She had spent 5 years erasing the name Lancaster from her mind, burying every memory of the man who had once meant everything to her. But this was an opportunity too big to ignore. So with a steady heart and the mindset of a professional, she accepted. On her first day at Lancaster Corporation, Daisy walked into the boardroom with unshakable confidence. But the moment the door opened, she froze. Damian Lancaster was standing there. He was no longer the man she had once known. Once a charming and warm university student, he now carried the aura of a powerful businessman. His tailored dark suit emphasized his broad shoulders, and his sharp gaze suggested he was accustomed to commanding the world. Her heart clenched, but she masked it with a calm, unreadable smile. She had learned never to let him hurt her again. "Daisy." Damian spoke first, his voice deep and controlled. "Mr. Lancaster," she replied coolly, deliberately creating distance. Something flickered in his eyes, but it was gone in an instant. He remained composed, pulling out a chair and gesturing for her to sit. "I didn't think you would accept," he said, his gaze never wavering from hers. "Business is business," Daisy said lightly. "I don't let personal matters interfere with my career." A shadow crossed his eyes, but he simply nodded. "Good, because I want you to lead this project." Daisy hesitated. "Why me?" He leaned forward slightly, his voice smooth yet carrying something deeper. "Because you're the best." It should have been a compliment, but Daisy sensed something more. This wasn't just about business. Damien wanted her back in his life. She met his gaze steadily, refusing to waver. "I'll do the job, but that's it. Don't expect anything more, Damien." He smirked, an enigmatic smile that sent a shiver down her spine. "We'll see." Daisy kept her promise. She focused solely on her work, maintaining a strictly professional relationship with Damien. But Damien did not. He was present at every meeting, scrutinized every detail of her designs, and found excuses to extend their discussions long past working hours. At first, Daisy ignored him, but she couldn't ignore the way his gaze lingered on her, as if searching for something he had lost. Then, everything took a devastating turn. Daisy felt her blood freeze as whispers filled the gala hall. Damien Lancaster. Engaged. The words echoed in her mind, drowning out the chatter around her. And then, she saw her. Anna Beaumont. Beautiful, graceful, everything society expected as the perfect match for a Lancaster heir. And in front of hundreds of guests, Anna smiled sweetly, her voice cutting through the air like a knife. "I'm looking forward to becoming Damien's wife. We've already discussed having children soon. It will be a wonderful step forward for both our family and the company." The world tilted. The air felt suffocating. For a split second, Daisy was 21 again, waking up to an empty bed, to the realization that the man she loved had disappeared without a trace. But this time he was standing right there. Damien remained silent, his expression unreadable. He didn't deny it. He didn't look for her. The weight in Daisy's chest became unbearable. She refused to let him see her break. Lifting her chin, she turned sharply and walked away, her heels clicking against the marble floor, each step carrying the pieces of her shattered heart. Damien stood beside Anna, his expression unreadable. He neither confirmed nor denied her words. Daisy couldn't take it anymore. She turned and walked out of the gala, her heart racing with emotions she couldn't even name. Anger, disappointment, heartbreak. She wasn't the same girl from 5 years ago, but standing in front of Damien again, she felt like she was being swept into a storm she had no control over. She was about to call for a car when a hand grabbed her arm. "Damien, what's wrong?" His voice was calm, steady, like nothing had happened. Daisy pulled her arm free, her eyes flashing with pain. "Are you really going to marry her?" Damien studied her for a long moment before replying. "That's none of your concern." The words cut deep. Daisy let out a bitter laugh. "You're right," she said. "You don't concern me anymore." She turned away, walking straight out of the event, swearing this would be the last time she ever let Damien hurt her. But she had no idea things were far more complicated than they seemed. Daisy should have forgotten about Damien after that night. She told herself their lives no longer intersected, but things were never that simple. Since the gala, Damien seemed to be everywhere. He involved himself in every stage of the project, giving feedback on things that others could have handled. He personally reviewed every design, even finding ways to prolong meetings just to keep her around. One late night, Daisy stayed behind to finalize the last sketches for the collection. When she finally packed up to leave, the sky opened up, rain pouring down in heavy sheets. She sighed, pulling out her phone to call for a taxi, but before she could press the button, a familiar black car pulled up in front of her. "Damien," he rolled down the window, his voice steady but leaving no room for argument. "Get in." Daisy hesitated. "I can get home on my own." "It's storming, Daisy." His eyes held something unreadable. "Do you want to stand here getting drenched or get in the car?" She hesitated for only a second before pulling the door open and sliding into the passenger seat. The warmth inside was a stark contrast to the cold rain outside, but the tension between them was suffocating. "What are you doing, Damien?" she finally asked. He kept his eyes on the road. "I don't know what you mean." She let out a humorless laugh. "You're at every single one of my meetings. You personally review my designs like you're the creative director instead of the CEO. You're doing everything to keep me close. So I'll ask again, what are you doing?" This time, Damien didn't answer right away. The car moved through the rain-soaked streets, but Daisy could feel the storm raging between them. Finally, he pulled over and turned to face her. "I never forgot you, Daisy." She froze. His voice was rough, as if the words had been difficult to say. I tried. I tried to live the life my mother planned for me. I tried to bury the past, but the moment I saw you again, I knew. I never really let you go. Her heart skipped a beat, but she refused to let herself fall. And yet, you're still engaged to Anna. Damien exhaled, his jaw tightening. It's not what you think. She let out a bitter laugh. Then explain it to me. He didn't. And that silence told her everything. Daisy turned away, her hands clenched into fists. It's too late, Damien. We can't go back. He whispered her name, but she had already opened the door, stepping into the pouring rain as if trying to wash away the past. But deep down, she knew some things could never be erased, no matter how far she ran. Daisy didn't return to Lancaster Corporation for 2 days. She needed time to think, to soothe her heart after her confrontation with Damien. But on the 3rd day, as she stepped into her studio, she was met with an unexpected visitor. Anna Beaumont. She was as flawless as ever, golden hair gleaming under the light, lips curled in a sharp smile, but there was irritation in her eyes. We need to talk, Anna said, her voice clipped with frustration. Daisy crossed her arms. I don't think we have anything to discuss. Anna stepped closer, her voice lowering like a warning. I don't care if he loves you. This marriage is still happening. It's not about love. It's about power. Do you really think you can change that? Daisy frowned. What are you talking about? Anna let out a bitter laugh. Has Damien never told you? His mother forced him to leave you 5 years ago. She threatened to destroy your career if he didn't walk away. And now, she's forcing him into this marriage to secure the company. Daisy's breath caught in her throat. Damien hadn't left because he didn't love her. He had left because he was trying to protect her. Before she could respond, Anna's phone buzzed. She frowned at the screen, then scoffed. Well, I guess you're no longer a problem. Damien just called off our engagement, in front of the entire press. Daisy's eyes widened. He did what? Anna stared at her for a moment before smirking. Looks like he doesn't care about the company anymore. He only cares about you. Daisy sat by the window, watching the rain pour down over the city. She should have felt relieved after learning the truth, that Damien never wanted to leave her, that he had been forced to. So why did her heart still ache? She knew the Lancaster family too well. They never let anyone escape the chains they placed. No matter how much Damien loved her, was he ever truly free to choose? The doorbell rang, snapping Daisy out of her thoughts. She opened the door, and Damien stood there. He was completely drenched, his breath ragged as if he had run all the way here. But what stunned Daisy wasn't just the fact that he was here. It was the look in his eyes. There was no controlled calmness, no mask of a powerful CEO. Instead, there stood a man fighting for himself. I gave it all up. Damien's voice was hoarse but resolute. Daisy's breath caught. The man standing before her wasn't just Damien Lancaster, heir to a billion-dollar empire. He was Damien, the man who once whispered dreams into her ear, who once believed in love more than power. I didn't just call off the engagement, he continued, stepping forward. Rain dripped from his hair, but his eyes never wavered. I walked away from Lancaster Corporation. I'm not the CEO anymore. Daisy shook her head in disbelief. No, that's impossible. You spent your whole life spending my life as a puppet, Damien cut in. His voice trembled, but his gaze held steady. My mother said if I didn't marry Anna, I'd lose everything. She was right. I lost my name, my inheritance, my title. He let out a breathless laugh. But for the first time, I am free. Her chest tightened. Are you insane? You spent your whole life preparing for that position. Damien shook his head. No, I spent my whole life doing what my mother wanted, but for the first time, I'm doing what I want. Daisy froze. He swallowed hard, his expression softening. I let you go once because I thought it was the only way to protect you. But the truth is, you never needed protecting. You're the strongest person I know. He exhaled. I don't need a corporation. I don't need power. I just need you. A single tear slipped down Daisy's cheek. He let out a quiet, almost helpless laugh. I spent my whole life trying to be the man my mother wanted, but you're the only one who made me want to be the man I really am. Daisy took a step forward, her heart pounding. She reached up, touching his face. Cold from the rain, but his gaze was impossibly warm. "Are you sure?" she whispered. "No regrets?" Damien laced his fingers through hers, his smile gentle. "I've never been more sure of anything in my life." A choked breath escaped her lips before she pulled him into her arms. And for the first time in 5 years, there was nothing standing between them. 1 year later, Daisy never imagined she and Damien could have a happy ending, but with each passing day, their love only grew stronger. Damien had given up everything for her, but in the end, it was their love and his unwavering determination that changed everything. His mother, the greatest obstacle between them, slowly began to see what she had refused to acknowledge for years. Daisy wasn't a threat. She was the one who had brought true happiness into Damien's life. Without pressure or expectations, Damien returned to the company as a true leader, not one bound by duty, but by choice. They loved each other in the simplest yet deepest way. There was no more fear of the past separating them, only peaceful days filled with unwavering trust. Then, one magical night in Italy, where Daisy was attending an international fashion event, Damien knelt before her. Under the glow of city lights, with petals drifting through the evening breeze, he gazed at her with pure sincerity. "Daisy, you have changed my life in ways I never imagined. I lost you once, and I won't let that happen again. Will you be my wife?" Tears of joy filled her eyes. She didn't need to think. "Yes," she whispered, her voice trembling with emotion. "I want to." 1 year later, they were married in a sunlit garden, surrounded by everyone who loved them. Damien stood at the altar in a sharp black suit, watching as Daisy walked toward him in the breathtaking wedding dress she had designed herself. But the moment that warmed Daisy's heart the most was seeing his mother standing in the front row. As they exchanged vows, the older woman took Daisy's hands and whispered, "Take care of my son, Daisy, and thank you for loving him." Daisy squeezed her hand gently, smiling brightly. As they kissed, surrounded by cheers and petals floating in the air, Daisy knew one thing for certain. From a love they once thought was lost, from the pain of the past, they had found their way back to each other. And this time, they would never let go again. A year after their wedding, Daisy and Damien's life was filled with love, laughter, and quiet moments of happiness. Their careers flourished. Daisy's fashion brand was gaining international acclaim, and Damien led Lancaster Corporation with a renewed sense of purpose. But nothing compared to the joy of expecting their first child. From late-night nursery preparations to Damien reading parenting books with intense focus, every moment was filled with excitement. He would rest his hand on Daisy's belly, feeling their son's tiny kicks, whispering promises of love and protection. Then, on a warm summer night, their baby boy arrived. Theodore Reed Lancaster. The moment Damien held him, his eyes shone with emotions too deep for words. "You're my greatest gift," he whispered. Daisy, exhausted but overjoyed, watched her husband and son, knowing their love had created something truly beautiful. As they lay together that night, Theo nestled between them. Daisy murmured, "I never imagined life could be this perfect." Damien kissed her forehead and smiled. "It's only the beginning." Their journey had been filled with heartbreak and obstacles, but in the end, love had brought them here, to a future more beautiful than they had ever dreamed.
Subscribe now and hit the notification bell so you don't miss the next move. Stop! They thought Eleanor Vance was home crying. She was actually buying a $10,000 dress and hiring the best private detective in the city. Tell us in the comments, do you believe a person can be completely betrayed and still achieve victory? What would you do in a situation like this? Part 1. The coronation of audacity. The young woman in Scarlet Valentino, clinging to Alexander Sterling's arm at the Grand Astor Club in New York, knew 3 crucial things. First, that Eleanor Vance had orchestrated every detail for her to be there that night. Second, that the flash drive in Eleanor's Hermes bag contained photos of Scarlett with 2 other married men over the last 6 months. And third, most importantly, that in 30 minutes, Scarlett Blake would leave that gala ball weeping like a child, while Eleanor would become the legend that New York high society would recount for the next 50 years. Alexander thought he was trading a boring wife for a luxury arm candy. Scarlett thought she was conquering a prince. Neither of them imagined they had just awakened a queen, and queens do not forgive. They destroy with style. The September night at the Grand Astor Club was drenched in ostentation and falsehood. Baccarat crystal chandeliers cast a golden light over the main ballroom, where the crème de la crème of New York society gathered for the Legacy Foundation's traditional annual gala ball. Alexander Sterling adjusted the cuff of his Italian silk shirt for the 3rd time in 5 minutes. At 38, the real estate mogul had built an empire that guaranteed him a constant presence in the social columns. But tonight, specifically, he felt particularly anxious. Not because of the event's importance, but because of the company he had chosen to bring. Scarlett Blake glided through the ballroom as if she owned the place. At 29, the young woman flaunted a striking, artificially enhanced beauty, with platinum blonde hair falling in perfect waves over bare shoulders, highlighted by the scarlet Valentino gown Alexander had specially purchased for the occasion. The generous cleavage and the fabric that hugged every curve of her body did not go unnoticed by the male gazes present, nor by the whispered comments of the society matrons. "Alexander, darling," the sharp voice of Mrs. Victoria Albright, a senator's wife, cut the air like a knife. "What a surprise to see you here, and with company." Her eyes scanned Scarlett from head to toe, a predatory analysis disguised as social courtesy. "Victoria, always a pleasure." Alexander forced a smile, while feeling sweat form in small beads on his forehead. "This is Scarlett Blake, my special consultant." Scarlett laughed, a crystalline sound that resonated in the room. "Consultant? What modesty, my love." Her blood-red nails possessively caressed Alexander's arm. "We're much more intimate than that, aren't we?" Alexander's embarrassment was palpable, but Scarlett seemed to feed on the situation. She had spent months planning this moment, the night she would finally be introduced in society as Alexander Sterling's new woman. In her young, ambitious mind, this was her official coronation. The legitimate wife, Eleanor, had become a ghostly figure in their conversations, a woman who preferred discretion to the spotlight. And this, for Scarlett, was a sign of weakness. "And where is Mrs. Sterling?" Victoria's question was posed with the surgical precision of someone who knows exactly where to poke to inflict pain. "I haven't seen her at a social event in ages." Alexander swallowed. "Eleanor has been busy with personal projects." "What a shame," Victoria murmured, though her tone suggested the opposite. She was such an elegant woman. She always knew how to behave with class. The word hung in the air like a death sentence. Scarlett felt a pang of irritation. Why did everyone keep comparing her to that faded woman? "Alexander, I need to talk to you about the marina project," interrupted David Shaw, one of the firm's junior partners. The relief on Alexander's face was instantaneous. While the men stepped away to discuss business, Scarlett remained alone in the center of the ballroom, feeling like a queen on her throne. Social photographers' flashes found her constantly, and she knew her photos would be featured in the gossip magazines the following week. Alexander Sterling's new passion. Oh, she could already imagine the headlines. Bubbly champagne flowed generously among the guests, and Scarlett didn't hold back. With every sip, she felt more secure, more in control. She approached a group of socialites she knew superficially from salons and gyms in the city's wealthiest neighborhoods. "Scarlett? What a stunning dress," commented Patricia, the wife of a judge. "Valentino, a gift from Alexander," Scarlett replied, making sure to emphasize the intimacy. "He has such refined taste for choosing women's clothing." The women exchanged knowing glances. They all knew what that meant. Alexander Sterling was publicly flaunting his mistress. A behavior that, while not uncommon in these circles, still caused a stir when done so blatantly. "And how are you adapting to your new position?" Patricia's question was loaded, and they all laughed discreetly. "Perfectly," Scarlett retorted, lifting her chin. "In fact, I've always felt more at home in this environment than certain people who isolate themselves at home." The malicious comment about Eleanor did not go unnoticed. The women present knew the unwritten code of high society well. When a wife stopped appearing at events, it usually meant she had lost the battle to a younger, more ambitious rival. On the other side of the room, Alexander tried to focus on the business conversation, but his eyes constantly drifted toward Scarlett. Part of him felt proud to be with a woman so young and attractive. It was a confirmation of his virility and success. Another part, however, began to question the wisdom of so openly exposing his extramarital relationship. "She's gorgeous," commented David, following Alexander's gaze. "But don't you think it's risky to bring your friend to an event of this magnitude?" "Scarlett isn't just a friend," Alexander retorted, more defensively than he intended. "We have a serious relationship." "Serious?" David raised an eyebrow. "And does your wife know?" Alexander looked away. Eleanor knew, of course. How could she not know? The rumors had been rampant for months, and he hadn't even bothered to be discreet. But Eleanor, true to her reserved nature, hadn't made scenes or threats. She had simply withdrawn further, which Alexander had interpreted as tacit acceptance of the new situation. "Eleanor understands that our marriage has evolved into something different," he murmured, sipping Scotch whiskey. The truth was, Alexander had married Eleanor Vance 15 years ago for practical reasons. She came from a traditional family with important connections in the judiciary and politics, connections that were crucial to his business growth. Eleanor was intelligent, cultured, a perfect wife on paper. But as the years passed, Alexander began to see her as part of the furniture, always present, always reliable. But without the sparkle and excitement he had started seeking elsewhere. Scarlett represented everything his wife was not: spontaneous, sensual, impressionable. "Alexander!" Scarlett's voice snapped him back to the present. She approached with a radiant smile, followed by a younger man he recognized as Ethan Campbell, the heir to one of the country's largest fortunes. "Ethan was just telling me about the new art collection he recently acquired," Scarlett said, her eyes gleaming with interest. "Picasso, Van Gogh! It's fascinating!" Alexander felt a pang of irritation. Scarlett was clearly flirting. And Ethan, known for his womanizing reputation, seemed willing to reciprocate. It was humiliating to have to compete for his own mistress's attention in public. "Scarlett, we need to speak with the event organizers," he interrupted, taking her arm. "But Alexander, Ethan was inviting me to see his private gallery," she pouted. "Another time," Alexander retorted dryly, guiding her away from the young heir. As they walked across the ballroom, Scarlett whispered in his ear, "You don't have to be jealous, my love. You know you're the only man in my life." The words were supposed to reassure him, but Alexander felt a growing unease. There was something about Scarlett's attitude tonight, an excessive confidence, an assumption that her place was guaranteed, that deeply bothered him. Near the main table, where event organizers and important politicians were seated, Alexander saw Dr. Julian Hale, an influential society columnist. The man was observing them with evident interest, already mentally drafting the note that would appear in his column the next day. "Alexander Sterling, it's been a while." Julian approached with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "And this lovely young woman must be Mrs. Sterling?" The silence that followed was deafening. Alexander felt his face flush as Scarlett, far from being embarrassed, smiled even wider. "Not yet," she retorted with a giggle. "But who knows, maybe soon." The insinuation was crystal clear. Scarlett was not content with just being the mistress. She had bigger plans, and she was announcing them to one of the city's most dangerous gossips. Alexander forced a nervous laugh. "Julian, meet Scarlett Blake. Scarlett is one of the city's most respected journalists." "It's a great pleasure," Julian said, kissing Scarlett's hand with exaggerated gallantry. "I imagine we'll have much to talk about in the near future." The veiled threat did not go unnoticed by Alexander. Julian Hale had the power to make or break reputations with a single column. If he decided to turn the situation into a scandal, the consequences could be devastating, not only for his public image, but for his business. While they spoke, the ballroom continued to fill. Influential politicians greeted businessmen. Socialites flaunted their latest acquisitions of jewelry and couture, and the orchestra played classic waltzes, creating a perfect soundtrack for this theater of appearances. Scarlett was in her element. She greeted acquaintances, posed for photos, waved to important people as if she were, in fact, Mrs. Sterling. Every gesture was calculated to solidify her position, to make it clear that she was not just a passing fling, but the new reality in Alexander's life. But deep in her ambitious mind, Scarlett could not entirely ignore the whispers she heard passing by. "Where is Eleanor Vance? What a shame. Poor Eleanor was always such a distinguished lady. Why did everyone insist on talking about that woman?" Scarlett had never met her personally. Alexander always said that Eleanor preferred to avoid conflicts and confrontations. To her, this only confirmed her superiority. While Eleanor hit it home, she shone in the halls of high society. What Scarlett did not know was that at that very moment, just a few blocks away, Eleanor Vance was meticulously preparing for her own entry into the Grand Astor Club. And when she arrived, nothing would ever be the same. If you were Alexander, what would you do? Do you believe revenge can be an act of elegance? Leave your opinion in the comments. Part 2. The Strategy in Black Chanel. Eleanor Vance stood before the full-length mirror in her dressing room, observing her own image with the analytical coolness of a general planning a battle. At 38, she possessed a mature, sophisticated beauty that contrasted drastically with the obvious, youthful allure of her rival. Her dark brown hair fell in soft waves to her shoulders, framing a face with classic features that needed no heavy makeup to make an impact. The dress she had chosen for the night was a masterpiece of French haute couture, a black Chanel couture with an impeccable cut, featuring pearl details that ran across the discreet yet elegant neckline. The piece had cost more than many cars, but it wasn't the price that made it special. It was what it represented. Power, class, legitimacy. Everything Scarlett Blake was trying to purchase with borrowed money from another woman's husband. Eleanor knew exactly what was happening at the Grand Astor Club at that moment. She had received no less than 15 calls from concerned friends throughout the week, each eager to be the first to tell her about the public humiliation Alexander was inflicting. What none of them knew was that Eleanor had orchestrated every detail of that situation. "Ma'am, the car has arrived," announced Maria, her housekeeper for over a decade. The middle-aged woman looked at Eleanor with equal parts admiration and concern. "Are you sure you want to do this?" Eleanor smiled, the first genuine smile she had worn in months. "I've never been so sure of anything in my life, Maria." The truth was that Eleanor had discovered Alexander's betrayal long before any social gossip. Not because she was particularly astute, but because Alexander was shamefully careless. Receipts for expensive restaurants for two when he was supposedly at work meetings, charges for jewelry and dresses on his corporate card, a woman's perfume on his clothes, that was definitely not hers. During the first few months, Eleanor felt the familiar pain of betrayal, the wound to her ego, the feeling of inadequacy, the questioning of where she had failed as a wife. But then, on a particularly melancholy Tuesday afternoon, something shifted. She was looking through a wedding photo album when she came across an image of herself on her wedding day. In that photo, she radiated a light that had been lost during the years of marriage. It was at that moment that Eleanor grasped a liberating truth. She hadn't lost Alexander because she failed as a wife. She had lost Alexander because he failed as a man. Based on this epiphany, Eleanor began to plan. Not a vulgar, emotional revenge, but a cold, surgical strategy that would not only expose the couple's farce, but also guarantee her the freedom she had subconsciously desired for years. For the next 6 months, Eleanor watched. She discreetly hired a private investigator, not to confirm the betrayal she already knew, but to meticulously document it. Photographs, videos, hotel records, even recordings of compromising conversations Alexander and Scarlett had in public places, thinking they were safe in the bubble of arrogance they had created. More importantly, Eleanor used this time to reorganize her finances. Alexander always assumed she was financially dependent on him, an ignorant, sexist assumption. In reality, Eleanor had inherited a considerable fortune from her paternal grandmother, real estate investments and stocks that she managed personally without involving her husband. Furthermore, she had her own successful art consulting business. During the months of her absence from social events, Eleanor had also dedicated herself to herself in a way she hadn't in years. A personal trainer 3 times a week, regular beauty treatments, a complete wardrobe overhaul. Not to win Alexander back. That bridge was irreversibly burned. But for herself. Tonight, specifically, Eleanor had chosen the Legacy Foundation Gala for precise strategic reasons. It was an event that brought together the core of the New York elite, people who had known her family for decades and who respected her lineage and class. It was also an environment where unwritten social rules played in her favor. As much as they tolerated male excesses in private, the public exposure of a marital betrayal was still considered an act of bad taste that deserved to be punished. Most crucially, Eleanor knew Alexander would bring Scarlett to the ball. It was she herself who, through a mutual friend, had planted the idea in the ambitious young mistress's head. The Legacy Foundation Gala is the most important event of the year, she had strategically commented during a luncheon. That's where society truly presents itself. Eleanor's private chauffeur, John, was waiting for her at the building entrance. "Good evening, Mrs. Vance," he greeted, opening the door of the black Mercedes-Benz S-Class. "You look dazzling tonight." "Thank you, John." To the Grand Astor Club. During the 30-minute drive, Eleanor mentally reviewed every detail of her plan. She had scheduled her arrival for the exact moment the ball was at its peak, when all the important guests were present, when the social photographers were most active, when Alexander and Scarlett were most relaxed and confident. Eleanor's phone vibrated with a message from Leonore, the wife of a judge and one of her oldest friends. "Darling, they are shamelessly exhibiting themselves. She is practically announcing herself as your replacement. Come fast and end this farce." Eleanor smiled, reading the message. Leonore had always been her fiercest ally, a woman of the old guard who wholeheartedly believed that certain social traditions and hierarchies should be respected. To Leonore, Scarlett was nothing more than a classless social climber, trying to occupy a place that didn't belong to her. Other messages followed, all from indignant friends, reporting on Alexander and Scarlett's behavior. "She's wearing a red Valentino, completely inappropriate for a charity event," wrote Patricia. He introduced her as a special consultant, but she herself corrected him, saying they were much more intimate. added Victoria Albright. Every message confirmed that Eleanor's plan was working perfectly. Alexander and Scarlett were digging their own grave with an almost comical enthusiasm. "We are arriving, Mrs. Vance," John announced, interrupting her reflections. Eleanor looked out the window and saw the golden lights of the Grand Astor Club shining in the night. Dozens of luxury cars were parked at the entrance, while paparazzi and social photographers awaited the arrival of important figures. The red carpet stretched from the sidewalk to the main door, flanked by lush floral arrangements. "John, give me 5 more minutes," Eleanor requested. "I want my entrance to be memorable." She opened her Hermes bag and checked the contents one last time. In addition to the usual items, there was a discreet flash drive containing all the documents and evidence she had compiled on Alexander and Scarlett. She didn't plan to use it tonight, but it was always good to have an ace up her sleeve. Eleanor also carried something far more powerful than any physical evidence: the absolute certainty that she was doing the right thing. For 15 years, she had been the discreet, perfect wife who solved problems without making waves. Tonight, she would be the opposite. "Now, John, it's showtime." The driver smiled through the rearview mirror. He had watched Eleanor grow from a shy young woman to a powerful one, and he knew this night would be historic. When the Mercedes stopped in front of the Grand Astor Club, a murmur spread among the photographers. Eleanor Vance had become a mysterious figure in recent months. Her absence from social events had generated speculation and conspiracy theories. Now, her reappearance promised answers. John got out of the car and walked calmly to the rear door. The silence was almost palpable. Even the most seasoned paparazzi knew they were about to witness something extraordinary. When the door opened and Eleanor stepped onto the red carpet, there was a moment of suspended time. She was radiant in a way no one remembered seeing her before. More confident, more commanding, more genuinely powerful. Flashes erupted in a frantic sequence as Eleanor walked slowly toward the entrance. Every step was calculated. Every movement was a declaration. She acknowledged the crowd with elegant waves, but did not stop for interviews. There was more important work to be done. At the club entrance, the doorman greeted her with an almost feudal bow. "Mrs. Vance, what an honor to have you back with us." "The pleasure is mine, Robert. A beautiful night, isn't it?" As she walked through the club's corridors toward the main ballroom, Eleanor could hear the crowd's murmur inside. Music, laughter, animated conversations. The sound of people who had no idea their lives were about to be turned upside down. She paused in front of the ballroom's double doors. She adjusted her pearl necklace one last time and took a deep breath. On the other side of those doors were Alexander and Scarlett, likely still basking in the attention they received, still believing they had conquered something important. They had no idea that the true queen had arrived to claim her throne. Part 3. The elite duel. The ballroom of the Grand Astor Club was at its peak when Eleanor Vance made her entrance. The orchestra played a Strauss waltz. Couples danced elegantly in the center of the hall, and the hum of conversations created a symphony of polite courtesy. Alexander was near the bar, laughing heartily at a joke David Shaw had just told him, when the first whisper reached his ears. "Eleanor has arrived." The smile froze on his face. He slowly turned, searching for the familiar figure of his wife, but couldn't find her in the crowd. Part of his brain still expected it to be a rumor. "Alexander!" Leonor's voice sounded behind him like the harbinger of a storm. "Your wife looks stunning tonight." He turned and saw Leonor, with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. The kind of smile that high society women used when they were about to witness the public humiliation of someone they deemed deserving. It was then he saw her. Eleanor was entering the main hall with the serenity of a queen returning to her palace after a long exile. There was something different about her, an aura of power and self-possession that Alexander did not recall ever seeing before. The black Chanel gown hugged her silhouette with mathematical elegance. The pearls on her neck caught the light hypnotically, and her brown hair gleamed like polished silk. But the most impressive thing was her posture. Eleanor did not walk. She glided. Every movement was deliberate, every gesture calculated for maximum impact. And wherever she passed, conversation ceased, gazes turned, and a respectful silence spread like ripples in a pond. Alexander felt his mouth go dry. In 15 years of marriage, he had never seen Eleanor dominate a room that way. It was as if she had gone from being a supporting character to the protagonist of her own life. On the other side of the room, Scarlett was recounting an anecdote to a group of businessmen's wives when she noticed her audience had become distracted. They were all looking at something, or someone, behind her. "What is it?" she asked, turning to follow the direction of their gazes. And then she saw her too. Scarlett had often fantasized about what her first encounter with Alexander's legitimate wife would be like. In her fantasies, Eleanor would be a faded woman, visibly aged, clearly inferior in every way that mattered. The reality was a brutal shock. The woman walking toward her radiated a natural elegance that no amount of money could buy. There was something almost aristocratic in her posture, an innate class that suddenly made Scarlett feel like a child playing dress-up in her mother's clothes. Eleanor greeted the guests with the perfect grace of someone born into that world. A kiss on Victoria Albright's cheek, a warm handshake with the senator, a kind word for the judge's wife. Every interaction reaffirmed her position in the social hierarchy, not as the betrayed wife seeking sympathy, but as the grand dame returning to her rightful place. "Eleanor, darling!" Patricia's voice rang out like a crystal bell. The judge's wife approached with open arms, clearly moved to see her friend after months of absence. "What immense joy to have you back. We missed you terribly." "Patricia, you're radiant as always," Eleanor replied, her voice melodious with a tone of genuine affection. "How are you, Robert? I heard the Supreme Court appointment was confirmed." Yes, we are very happy. But tell us about you. Where have you been hiding all these months? You were missed so much." Eleanor smiled with mysterious elegance. "I was taking care of some personal affairs. Sometimes a woman needs time to reorganize her priorities." The response was diplomatically vague, but charged with a subtext that did not go unnoticed by the women present. They all knew about the situation with Alexander and Scarlett, and now they began to understand that Eleanor's absence from social events had not been due to humiliation or despair, but to strategy. While Eleanor spoke, Alexander remained paralyzed near the bar. Part of him wanted to approach, greet her as if nothing had changed, maintain the facade of a harmonious marriage they had always presented in public. The other part, the cowardly, guilty part, just wanted to disappear. The decision was taken by Scarlett. The young woman, fueled by a toxic mix of jealousy and youthful arrogance, decided she would not be eclipsed by an older woman, no matter how elegant. After all, she was the one with Alexander now. She was the one wearing the expensive gifts, the one occupying his bed, the one with future plans with him. "Alexander," she whispered, pulling on his arm. "Let's go greet your wife. It's the polite thing to do." Alexander swallowed. "Scarlett, maybe it's not the best time." "Nonsense," she retorted, already walking toward the group surrounding Eleanor. Scarlett did not realize she was about to commit the most catastrophic mistake of her young life. In her limited mind, this would be the moment of her official coronation, when she would present herself as Alexander's new woman to the former wife, definitively establishing the new hierarchical order. Eleanor saw the couple approach long before they reached her. Her eyes met Alexander's for a brief moment, and he visibly flinched under her gaze. It was as if she could see right through him, seeing all the guilt, all the shame, all the cowardice he carried. Eleanor. Alexander forced a smile as he approached the group. His voice came out higher than he intended. What a surprise to see you here. The silence that followed was deafening. All nearby conversations ceased. All eyes turned toward the trio, and even the orchestra seemed to lower its volume. It was as if the entire ballroom was holding its breath, waiting for what would happen next. Eleanor looked at Alexander for a long moment, her expression perfectly serene. When she finally spoke, her voice had the cutting coldness of tempered steel. Alexander, what an interesting coincidence. I thought you were in Chicago this week. An important meeting with investors. Isn't that what you said? The lie was exposed with surgical elegance. Alexander had fabricated that excuse to justify his absence from home in recent days, when in fact, he was at a luxury hotel with Scarlett, preparing for the ball. Now, confronted with his own dishonesty in public, he stammered, The meeting was canceled, last minute." "What a shame," Eleanor murmured, her tone suggesting the opposite. "Well, at least you didn't miss an event as important as this." It was then that Scarlett decided to intervene. The young woman, misinterpreting the moment and thinking Eleanor was being submissive by not directly confronting the situation, took a step forward with a smile that was meant to be understanding, but sounded condescending. "You must be Eleanor," she said, extending a hand with perfectly manicured red nails. "I'm Scarlett Blake. I've heard so much about you." The group around them collectively held their breath. It was a moment of tension so palpable that even guests further away began to approach discreetly, sensing something extraordinary was about to happen. Eleanor looked at Scarlett's extended hand for a moment that seemed eternal. Then, with a smile that did not reach her eyes, she delicately shook it. "Scarlett, yes, I've heard a lot about you too." The phrase was delivered with such elegance that it took Scarlett a few seconds to realize the venom it contained. "Alexander told me you worked together," Eleanor continued, her voice maintaining the perfectly polite tone of high society. "Something about project development consulting?" Alexander opened his mouth to reply, but Scarlett interrupted him, clearly eager to establish her true position. "Oh, we are much more than colleagues," she giggled, a high-pitched sound that resonated uncomfortably in the ballroom's silence. "In fact, Alexander and I have a very special relationship." The words left her mouth with the confidence of someone who thought she was revealing a truth that would give her power over the situation. Instead, she had just fallen into the most elegant trap ever constructed at a New York social event. Eleanor tilted her head slightly, as if processing particularly interesting information. "Ah, I see," she said, her voice still maintaining that deadly courtesy. "How brave of you to make it public like this." The word brave was delivered in such a way that it sounded exactly like its antonym. Scarlett began to realize something was wrong, but her youth and inexperience prevented her from fully decoding the nuances of the conversation. Alexander, on the other hand, was pale as a sheet. He knew Eleanor well enough to recognize the danger signs, the overly polite tone, the smile that didn't reach her eyes, the upright, controlled posture. She was furious, but expressing that fury through the refined codes of high society, which made her infinitely more dangerous than any Adai emotional outburst. "Eleanor," he tried to intervene again. "Perhaps we should—" "Oh, Alexander," she interrupted gently. "There's no need for embarrassment among civilized people." She turned back to Scarlett with renewed interest. "Tell me, darling, how long have you two been working together?" Scarlett, interpreting the question as an opportunity to establish her supremacy, replied with youthful pride. "About 8 months. Alexander has been a wonderful mentor." "Mentor," Eleanor repeated, as if savoring the word. What an interesting term to describe the relationship. The air in the ballroom was so charged with tension that even the waiters stopped circulating with champagne trays. Dozens of eyes were fixed on the trio, and Julian Hale, the society columnist, was observing everything from a strategic distance, clearly taking mental notes for his column the next day. Leonore Albright approached the group with a smile that promised trouble. "Eleanor, darling, what a stunning dress. Chanel, isn't it? I've always envied your impeccable taste in fashion." "Thank you, Leonore. You know how it is. Some pieces never go out of style, do they?" The implication was clear. True elegance is timeless, unlike the passing trends certain younger people exhibit. Scarlett, finally starting to realize she was being subtly attacked, decided to counterattack. "Your dress is beautiful too," she told Eleanor, her tone trying to sound generous but failing miserably. "Very classic. It must have been terribly expensive." The comment was a grotesque blunder, suggesting that Eleanor cared about the price of her clothes, or worse, that she needed to justify her spending, was a display of poor class that made several women present gasp in shock. Eleanor smiled. This time, a truly dangerous smile. "My dear," she said, her voice soft as velvet, but sharp as a razor. "When you have true class, the price becomes irrelevant. It is something you are either born with or you never acquire." The phrase fell upon Scarlett like a silent bomb. For a moment, the young woman was speechless, slowly processing the fact that she had been publicly outclassed in the most elegant way possible. Alexander tried to intervene again, his voice desperate. "Well, I think we should all—" "Alexander," Eleanor interrupted him again, this time turning her full attention to him. "Since we are all gathered here, so, casually, perhaps it's a good time to clarify a few things." The entire ballroom seemed to have paused. Not even the sound of the orchestra could be heard, as if the musicians also wanted to hear what would happen next. "Clarifications are always welcome," murmured Leonore Albright, barely containing her excitement. Eleanor adjusted the pearls at her neck with deliberately slow movements, like a matador preparing the final thrust. "You see," her voice now taking on a tone of genuine amusement, "there are certain illusions that must be dispelled before they cause more embarrassment than they already have." Scarlett felt a chill of panic run down her spine. There was something about Eleanor's demeanor, an absolute confidence, an almost predatory serenity, that suggested she knew something monumental, something that would completely change the game. "I don't understand," Scarlett gasped. "Oh, darling," Eleanor retorted, her smile now genuinely radiant. "You will understand. All of you will." It was then that Eleanor Vance began to methodically, elegantly, and irreversibly destroy the lives of everyone who had underestimated her power. Part 4. The Ruthless Truth. "Alexander," Eleanor said, her voice cutting through the ballroom's silence like glass against glass. "Since we are among friends, why don't you tell Scarlett about our conversation last night?" Alexander's face paled to a color that rivaled the pearls on his wife's neck. His eyes widened in absolute panic, because there had been no conversation with Eleanor the night before, nor on any night in the last few weeks. "I don't know what you're talking about," he stammered, but his trembling voice betrayed his nervousness. Eleanor tilted her head with feigned curiosity, as if genuinely surprised by her husband's response. "No? How odd. Perhaps my memory is failing me." She paused dramatically, scanning the circle of spectators that had formed around them. "Or perhaps you forgot to mention to your mentor that we are still married." The word mentor was delivered with such irony that several people in the group had to stifle nervous giggles. Scarlett felt the blood rush to her face, finally realizing she was being publicly ridiculed. "Of course we know you're married," Scarlett said, trying to regain some control over the situation. "But marriages evolve, don't they? Sometimes people find happiness in different places." Eleanor nodded with a graceful tilt of her head. "Evolution, a fascinating concept." She turned to Leonore Albright conspiratorially. "Leonore, you, married to Robert for 30 years, have you experienced this evolution?" Leonore laughed, a crystalline sound filled with aristocratic malice. "Never, darling. Robert knows his place very well." The comment was a direct stab at Alexander's masculinity, suggesting he had failed as a man by not maintaining order in his house. Several men present coughed uncomfortably, while their wives exchanged glances of approval. Victoria Albright joined the group, clearly unwilling to miss the spectacle. "Eleanor, it's so good to see you at our events again," she said with feigned effusiveness. "Your presence always raises the level of any occasion." "That's very kind, Victoria. I was just explaining to young Scarlett how certain traditions work in our society." Scarlett felt increasingly cornered. There was something about the way these women spoke, always polite, always elegant, yet carrying a subtle venom that she could not counteract because she did not master the necessary social codes. "Traditions can be outdated," she said, trying to sound sophisticated. "The modern world allows people to be more authentic in their relationships." The silence that followed was so deep, you could hear the clinking of the chandelier crystals swaying gently with the air-conditioning breeze. Eleanor looked at Scarlett for a long moment, like a feline studying its prey before the fatal pounce. "Authenticity," she repeated slowly. "What a powerful word. You are right, dear. Authenticity is key." She paused, her smile turning predatory. "That's why I think it's time we were completely authentic about this situation." Alexander tried desperately to intervene. "Eleanor, perhaps this isn't the place." "Oh, but it is exactly the right place," she interrupted, her voice still maintaining that deadly courtesy. "After all, it was here you chose to make your association public. It's only fair to clarify a few details for our dear friends." Julian Hale had discreetly moved closer, his expression that of a journalist, scenting the story of the century. Other guests also approached, creating an ever-widening circle around the central trio. "You see," Eleanor continued, addressing the audience directly, "Dear Scarlett believes she conquered my husband's heart through her youth and authenticity." She paused for dramatic effect. "What she doesn't know is that Alexander has a very specific pattern when it comes to his extramarital affairs." Scarlett's eyes widened, suddenly realizing she was about to discover something devastating. "A pattern?" Leonore asked, clearly enjoying the moment. "Oh yes, young, ambitious women, from humble backgrounds, easily dazzled by expensive gifts and promises of social ascent." Eleanor listed the characteristics with the precision of a scientist cataloging specimens. "In the last 15 years, there have been at least, let me see, 6 of them." The number fell upon Scarlett like a hammer. She wasn't special. She wasn't unique. She was just the most recent in a long line of temporary replacements. Alexander was visibly desperate. "Eleanor, please!" "Oh, Alexander, don't be modest," she said with false admiration. "You have a special talent for finding these girls, always with the same profile. Receptionists, secretaries, flight attendants, young, impressionable women who mistake male attention for true love." Patricia Albright couldn't contain a giggle. "And what happened to the other 5, darling?" "Well," Eleanor replied, as if recounting a funny anecdote at a tea party, "some were discreetly dismissed when they started making inconvenient demands. Others realized for themselves that they weren't as special as they imagined. 1 or 2 even managed advantageous marriages with more available men." Scarlett felt the world spin around her. Everything she had believed about her relationship with Alexander, her uniqueness, their future plans, her privileged position, was crumbling like a house of cards. "But the thing is," Eleanor continued, speaking directly to Scarlett now, "you made one mistake none of the others made." "What mistake?" The question came out as a choked whisper. "You thought you had won." The words fell upon Scarlett with the weight of a judicial sentence. She looked around, seeing for the first time the expressions of the guests. Not admiration or envy, as she had imagined, but pity mixed with aristocratic disdain. Alexander never told me about the others, she stammered, turning to him for a denial, an explanation, anything to restore her reality. Alexander couldn't meet her eyes. His guilt was etched onto his face like a tattoo. Of course he didn't tell you, Eleanor said softly. Why would he? It would ruin the fantasy he creates for each of you. The fantasy that you are special, that you are different, that this time it's true love. Leonor Albright shook her head with theatrical disapproval. Men can be so cruel, can't they? Leading these poor girls to believe in fairy tales. The cruelty, Eleanor said, is not in having extramarital affairs. Powerful men have always had mistresses. It's almost a tradition. The cruelty lies in creating false expectations, in making these women believe they can occupy a place that was never intended for them. Scarlett finally exploded. And what is that place? That of the submissive wife who accepts everything in silence. The entire ballroom held its breath. It was the first time anyone had directly confronted Eleanor, and everyone wanted to see how she would respond. Eleanor smiled. Not the elegant, controlled smile she had maintained all night, but a genuine, almost amused one. "Oh, my sweet girl," she said, her voice tinged with a blend of pity and condescension. "You really don't understand, do you? Do you think I'm here, as the humiliated wife, trying to win back an unfaithful husband?" She paused. Her eyes scanned all the faces around her. "I didn't come here to fight for Alexander. I came here to give him back to you." The silence that followed was absolute. Not even the sound of the waiter's shoes on the marble could be heard. "Give him back?" Scarlett repeated. Utterly confused. "Yes, darling. You can keep him." Eleanor made an elegant gesture with her hand, as if delivering an undesirable gift. "In fact, I insist you keep him. After all, you both deserve each other." Alexander finally found his voice. "Eleanor, what are you talking about?" "I'm talking about freedom, Alexander. Yours and mine." She opened her Hermes bag and pulled out a sealed envelope. "The divorce papers were filed yesterday. You should receive official notification on Monday." The envelope passed from hand to hand, like a grande without a pin. Alexander held it with trembling fingers, his face expressing absolute shock. "But we never even discussed this?" "Yes, we did. For 8 months, Alexander. Every time you came home smelling of another woman's perfume. Every time you lied about where you had been. Every time you treated me like a piece of furniture that decorates the house but doesn't participate in the life happening inside it." Eleanor's voice remained serene, but there was tempered steel in every word. The conversation had been long and unilateral, but it happened. Scarlett looked at Alexander, expecting him to protest, to declare his love, to confirm the future plans they had made together. Instead, he looked at the envelope as if it were a bomb about to explode. "How much do you want?" was the first thing he managed to say. The question revealed so much about his character that several women present made barely disguised gestures of disgust. "Oh, Alexander," Eleanor said, shaking her head with feigned sadness. "Always reducing everything to money. I don't want your money, darling. I have my own." "Your own?" "Yes. Grandmother Beatrice's inheritance, which you always assumed was insignificant, because it was just women's things like properties and stocks. In reality, it's worth more than your company." She smiled. Much more. The shock on Alexander's face was comical. For 15 years, he had assumed he was the sole provider of the family, the only one with significant resources. Discovering that his wife was not only financially independent, but potentially richer than he was a devastating blow to his male ego. Furthermore, Eleanor continued casually, "My art consulting business has grown quite a bit in recent years. International clients, you know, people who value authenticity and experience." Scarlett finally understood the full dimension of her humiliation. She had gambled everything on a man she now discovered wasn't even half the prize she had imagined him to be. "So you give us your blessing?" she stammered, trying to find some thread of dignity to cling to. "Oh, darling, it's not exactly a blessing," Eleanor replied with deadly sweetness. "It's more like returning a defective product to the store." The phrase resonated through the ballroom like a gunshot. Several people laughed openly, unable to contain their reaction to the brutal elegance of the retort. Alexander finally exploded. "Eleanor, you can't humiliate me like this in public." "Humiliate you?" She'd appeared genuinely surprised. "Alexander, darling, I've done nothing but speak the truth. If the truth is humiliating, perhaps the problem is not mine." Julian Hale approached with his social predator smile. "Eleanor, may I have a statement for my column?" "Of course, Julian." She turned to him with the grace of a seasoned actress. "You may say that I am beginning a new chapter in my life. Sometimes, when a door closes, we realize it was actually keeping us captive in a place too small for our dreams. And future plans? I'm moving to Paris next week. I have some interesting projects waiting for me there." The word Paris landed on Alexander as a final sentence. Eleanor wasn't just divorcing him. She was literally fleeing the country, putting an ocean between them. Scarlett, attempting one last desperate move, said, "Well, at least now Alexander and I can be happy together, without secrets or lies." Eleanor looked at her with a mix of pity and amusement. "Oh, my sweet, naive girl," she said, her voice filled with an almost maternal condescension. "Do you really believe a man who cheated on his wife with you won't cheat on you with another?" The truth of the statement hit Scarlett like a punch to the gut. She looked at Alexander, searching for some sign of denial, some guarantee of future fidelity. Instead, he seemed to shrink further, clearly unwilling to publicly commit to her after the night's disaster. The lack of support was the final straw. Scarlett realized she had lost not only the battle against Eleanor, but also any chance of a future with Alexander. He was too cowardly to defend her when she needed him, too weak to take responsibility for his own actions. It was in that moment of absolute silence that Eleanor Vance delivered the final blow. "Well," Eleanor said, adjusting the pearls at her neck with an elegant final gesture. "It was a pleasure clarifying all of this. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have some dear friends to bid farewell to before my trip." She turned to leave, but stopped as if recalling something important. "Oh, and Scarlett?" The young woman looked up with hope, perhaps believing Eleanor would offer some word of reconciliation or advice. "The red dress looks beautiful on you, but for charity events, more subdued colors are more appropriate. It's a matter of social etiquette." The final critique was delivered with such elegance that even the most seasoned observers needed a few seconds to fully process the brutality of the comment. Eleanor had just given an etiquette lesson in the middle of a public humiliation, definitively establishing the social hierarchy between them. Scarlett stood still, paralyzed by shame, as Eleanor walked away with grace. Alexander remained by her side, but it was obvious to all that he was in shock, still processing the speed with which his life had collapsed. Julian Hale watched the scene with the keen eye of someone who had just witnessed the social story of the year. He was already mentally drafting the headline, "The Elegant Revenge: How Eleanor Vance Turned Humiliation into Triumph at the Season's Most Talked About Ball." Part 5. The Unsurpassable Legacy. 3 years later, the apartment in the 16th arrondissement overlooked the Eiffel Tower and was decorated with a perfect blend of French elegance and sophistication. Eleanor Vance, now Eleanor Dubois, sat on the terrace, sipping coffee while watching her 2-year-old twins, Henry and Beatrice, play in the private garden. Pierre Dubois walked onto the terrace carrying a tray with fresh croissants and the morning paper. "Mon amour," he said, kissing Eleanor's forehead gently. "There is an interesting article here about America." Eleanor smiled, accepting the cup of coffee he offered. At 38, She radiated a happiness she had never experienced during her 15 years of marriage to Alexander. Pierre was not just a better husband, he was a true partner, someone who respected her intelligence and ambition as much as he admired her beauty. What kind of article? About corporate bankruptcies? It seems a real estate developer called Sterling Ventures closed its doors last month. Alexander? Apparently. The article mentions financial mismanagement and lawsuits. The owner, Alexander Sterling, is under investigation for tax irregularities. Eleanor felt no pleasure in the news. That phase of her life was completely over. But there was a certain poetic justice in the fact that Alexander, who had always considered himself financially superior to her, had lost everything due to his own incompetence. "And the young woman he was with that night at the Grand Astor Club?" asked Pierre, who knew the whole story. "Scarlett." Eleanor mused for a moment. "I heard she married a dentist in Miami. Apparently she learned the lesson of not betting on losing horses." Pierre laughed, a rich, warm sound that resonated on the terrace. "You are terrible, darling, but it is poetic justice, as we say." Henry ran toward the table, speaking an adorable mixture of English and French. "Mama, look, I picked a flower for you." Eleanor lifted her son, accepting the small daisy he had gathered in the garden. Beatrice soon joined them, demanding equal attention. "Mes petits trésors," Pierre murmured, watching the scene with obvious adoration. This was the life Eleanor had built for herself, not as revenge against Alexander, but as a reward for her own courage. She had transformed betrayal into liberation, humiliation into opportunity, and an ending into a new beginning. Dubois' gallery had become one of the most prestigious in Paris under her curatorship, and she was expecting her third child, a girl they would name Sophie, after the grandmother who had left her the inheritance that made her independence possible. As she watched her children play in the Parisian garden, Eleanor reflected on the night at the Grand Astor Club 3 years ago. She had planned every detail of that public humiliation, but now she realized that the true victory had not been destroying Alexander and Scarlett that night. The true victory was this: a life built on her own terms, with a man who loved her completely, children who filled her heart, and a career that satisfied her soul. In the end, Eleanor Vance had discovered that the best revenge is not the destruction of your enemies, but the construction of a life so spectacular that it makes everything they did to try to diminish you utterly irrelevant. Final reflection and call to action. Closing. The story of Eleanor Vance teaches us that regret only has value when it turns into action. Her story is not about winning a battle, but about conquering a personal empire. Final, meaningful question. Was Eleanor's most powerful moment the public humiliation of Scarlett and Alexander at the club? Or was it her life, 3 years later, where she no longer felt pleasure in their collapse? Leave your comment below. If this story inspires you to take control of your own life, like and share. And of course, subscribe for more stories of queens who stage a comeback.